Hello and welcome along to this tutorial from Camunda about how to leverage BPMN with DMN, which basically means being able to use the power of workflows with business rules in order to make better processes and more interesting things. So my name is Niall Deehan. I'm an international consultant here with Camunda, and I'll be joined of course with my hawk, who is called Megan Frankenblast, and we'll be helping you to create a DMN table. We'll be building a BPMN model, which we can then use to call this DMN table. And then we'll also increase the complexity of our DMN model by adding a DRG to show the requirements there. And if you're wondering what DMN stands for Decision Modeling Notation. The way it works is if you have a certain input, you might want, depending on that input, a certain output, and though that output will depend on predefined rules. An example being if, for instance, there is a meal you'd like to prepare, maybe you pass in the information about what season it is, how many guests are arriving, and then you can choose your meal. There's also other bits and pieces to the notation, like the expression language field, and also decision requirements diagrams, and we'll get into that as we go along. The prerequisites for this particular video are pretty easy. All you need to do is find the Camunda modeler to build our tables and to build our BPMN model. And we also need the Camunda platform running to actually execute the models in question. And those guys are all found at camunda.com. Alrighty, so let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start things off with very simply. We have the Camunda modeler open and we're going to create our DMN table. Go up to File, New File, and DMN Table. Okay, once this is open, it's going to be pretty easy for us. We just need to start filling in the gaps. This particular table we're going to make is going to help us decide what beverage should be given to somebody based on the specific person that's asking for it and the time of day. So we need two inputs. And we also need a name. So we're going to have two inputs and one output. This is going to be called Decide on Beverage, and it's going to have two inputs. One is going to be name of recipient, and the other one is going to be time of day, or time of day. Okay, both of these are strings. Okay, and the output is going to be a drink that we're going to get them, also a string. Okay, so we have our input names, we have our output name, and the name of our table. The next thing we should do is decide on a hit policy, which is this guy right here. So the unique hit policy means that it's the default one. It has a U up here. If I select it, you can see that there it is from the drop down. And the unique hit policy would say that only one rule is allowed match, or no rules. If any more than one rule matches, then it'll actually throw an error. For our particular case, I'm going to select first. So this is a hit policy in which we'll go through each rule one by one, and then whichever rule actually matches, we will then actually go with that one. So the order is important, but the amount of rules that match is not. Okay, so let's add our first item, and that is the recipients. Now what I could do is I could go in here, add a rule, and I could then add something like Dale Cooper. Okay, and now if Dale Cooper matches, but because I kind of know the kind of people that are going to show up and who have very particular dietary requirements, I can instead just get rid of that there and select this field here where the string is. If I select that, I basically get to add allowed values. So I can say Dale Cooper will be wanting a drink, Bear Grylls, Yoko Ono, and that'll do, I think. There we go. So these are now the allowed values. So now I can say something like if Dale Cooper and Bear Grylls come in, for instance. So there are the values for this rule here. Next we have a time of day. The times of day I'm going to add are morning, afternoon, evening, and night. Alrighty, so if Dale Cooper and Bear Grylls come in and it's the morning, then the drink we're going to give them is going to be coffee. Specifically, actually, damn fine coffee. Okay, so that makes sense so far. So that's the first rule. So now we have our first rule set up. If Dale Cooper or Bear Grylls come in the morning, we're going to give them some damn fine coffee. Next up, rule 2, what if Yoko Ono shows up? It really doesn't matter what time of the day, but night is the most likely time to expect her, so we'll select night. And if she comes in at night, what we'll give her is, of course, a single plum in perfume, served in a man's hat. Okay, so that's very simple. So now we have those options there. Now we could also do something like saying it doesn't really matter who comes in, but if they do come in the afternoon or the evening, if we've gotten down this far, so at this point it's not the morning and it's not Dale Cooper, Dale or Bear. It's also not Yoko Ono, it's not at night, but if any other scenario, which is why we leave this blank, if it's afternoon or it's evening, we're going to go with Club Mate. Okay. Then we also have, of course, a special rule for any time of the day that isn't the morning and it's Bear Grylls who is coming. Okay, and it's not the morning, then he, of course, famously drinks lemonade. Okay. And then finally, if none of these rules match, okay, so if we haven't found a match and we get to the very, very bottom, we can leave this as a default. So we can say, okay, if we get down this far, it doesn't matter who they are or what time of day it is, we're just going to get them a nice beer. Okay. So this is our table so far. These are the essentially design parameters added. And what we need to do next is we actually need to add the execution parameters, like this lovely little button up here called Enter Advanced Mode. Okay, once I click that button, we will get a bunch of additional fields show up. We have this one here. We have one for each input and one for the output. So let's start up here. So this is going to be the key of the table. So this is the technical name for the table. It needs to be unique when deployed. So I'm going to call this decide on beverage. Okay. Next up, we need to fill in this. Now this is the name of the variable that we are expecting from this point. So I'm going to put in name because I would expect at this point to get a variable called name will be an input, and that's the value I'll pass here. And then we also have time of day. So let's go time of day. Now you can see here there's actually a bunch of other stuff you can add. You can add scripts in here and expand more complicated expressions. But for now we'll just say that we're expecting that when we call this table there'll be two variables present, one called name, one called time of day, and when there's an output that variable will be called drink. Okay. And now we just need to save this guy to our desktop. And we do that by clicking the save button right here. And then we're going to call this beverage.dmn and click save. Okay, so now we have essentially an XML file. If you look down here, we have a table and XML. So I can select here and I can see this is the XML. This is the DMN standard that is representing what we can see there. And we can now actually deploy this to Camunda in order to actually evaluate this table. Okay, so let's do that next. Now, obviously, for this to work, we actually need to be running Camunda. So if you don't already have Camunda running, or you're a bit sort of confused about how that works, the introduction video will be the best way to start, and then maybe you can come back once you have Camunda up and running. But once you do start it up, you should be brought to this page right here, which shows the various front ends. We have cockpit, task list, a welcome page, and admin. Now we want to deploy our DMN table to the engine, so we're going to do that by going into cockpit. The login should be, this is the regular distro, the login is demo. And what we should see is we should have one definition already deployed. We should have a few running instances. These are the demo version, the demo instances that show up on a fresh build of the distribution. Now what we want to do is we want to go up here to more and to deployments, because we're going to actually select our DMN file and deploy it to the engine via the front end. So if I click on deployments, there's a little deploy button right here. And now I'm going to be able to select a file and deploy that file. So I'm going to select choose file. I'm going to go to beverage.dmn, which is where we ended up last time, where we actually saved our file to. I'm going to open it, and then I'm going to type bev deployment and then click deploy. Okay, so that was successfully deployed. We can see if I click on decisions up here that is now deployed, decide on beverage, and I can click on that and see the table is now deployed and ready to be used. And before we actually call this from a BPMN model, it might be a nice idea to actually call this directly. Now, testing this decision table is actually pretty easy at this point because we have it deployed to Camunda locally, and therefore we can utilize the REST API in order to send requests and evaluations. So in this case, I have Postman right here, and Postman is going to help me by basically sending a REST call that's going to specifically call our process by the key. We may remember entering this key on our DMN table or decision table because we gave this guy here, decide on beverage. This is the key that we entered, and this means that any call that's made to that, this is the key in which we can reference it. In this case here, you can see that I am making this call to evaluate this, and I'm giving it two variables. I'm giving it Dale Cooper and the time of day being the morning. So if I send this to the engine and click send, okay, we got back a 200, okay, and you can see here that the result is damn fine coffee because that is what Dale Cooper wants in the morning. We're going to return to the modeler. Okay, and this is where we modeled our table. And I'm going to just add a new tab, and this is going to create a new diagram. This diagram is going to be a BPMN model. So we're going to start here. Okay, this is where we begin, and we're going to basically create a user task where a user can enter details of the order. So enter order details. Okay, and these would be the parameters required by the DMN table. The next part of this process is going to be a business rules task. So this is a task in BPMN in which you can directly attach a DMN model. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to right in here decide on beverage. Okay, and then finally we're going to return back to the user where we can display to them the beverage that is selected. So this is view beverage. Alrighty, and then we shall end the process. Right, so it's a really simple process that's going to allow a user to evaluate the table whenever they feel like it using a user interface. So while this is great for design time, we now need to go in and actually make this executable and add the parameters that the engine is going to need in order to call this table. Okay, so let's do that next. So all parameters that require execution are added via this properties panel on the right. So I'm going to select that, and first of all we need to give some parameters to this specific process. So this is going to be called the order drink process, and I'm going to give it a ID and then also a human readable name. Okie dokie. And to make things a little faster, I'm not going to add a user interface for either of these. I'm going to use the default one from Camunda's own task list, which I'll show you shortly. Instead, I'm going to spend my time on this task right here. And if I select that, the properties panel will then change to the context that we're currently in, which is a business rules task. Now, there are lots of types of ways of implementing a business rules task. If I select the drop down here, you can see we can just call a Java class, maybe an expression, maybe a connector if you want to call an external service or an external task. We also have DMN, which is really important because that's what we're going to be using. So if I select DMN, you'll see that below and we have a bunch of other bits and pieces that show up that we need to fill in. The first one here is decision ref. Now, just like the REST API call, this is going to be the key of our table. So if I select this guy here, enter advanced mode, and then we can see that here is our key. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to say, okay, the daemon table to call is this one. Now, in design time, there's no direct link between these two files. It's only at runtime that this will be evaluated. And so if this beverage daemon is deployed to the engine, then this will find it. We also get a choice of binding. latest version of the table, a specific deployment, the one that was deployed with this table, or a specific version. We're going to say the latest one. And we also have here the results variable. So obviously when you evaluate a table, you get an output, and you might want to put that into the context of the process. So we can say drink will be the result variable. Below that, you'll see a map of decision, because our table is relatively simple, but a table can have multiple rows that match, and also multiple outputs. And these represent those. Our table, of course, is just a single row with a single output, so it's a single entry. Okay, which means that at the end of evaluating this table, we will have a variable called drink in our context that is then going to be viewable here. Okay, and that's all we need to do to actually call this, and this is ready to go. So I just need to save this, and then in the same way I did with the daemon table, save it somewhere. Click save. Okay, and it's going to be order drink. Okay, click save. And now we have a BPMN XML file that's executable, that's ready to roll. So for that, we need to go back to Camunda, back here. And I'm going to go into more exactly the same as I did with my DMN table. Click on deployments, click this little button here, deploy, choose my file, choose my order drink BPMN that I just saved. There's no reason why I wouldn't maybe want to deploy these together, but just for the sake of ease, I'm just going to deploy them one by one, and click deploy. Okay, great. So that deployed successfully. And if I click on the processes tab up here, I should be able to see that my order drink process has now been deployed and is now ready to roll. So now the next stage is, of course, running this process and seeing if the tables evaluate correctly. So how exactly are we going to step through this process? It's going to be using Camunda's own task list. We're in Cockpit right now, which is an admin view of what's going on. But if you want to see the end user view, the person who will actually be going through this process would need to go to task list by selecting the little house guy on the top right and selecting task list. Okay, so once I open up here, I arrive in task list. And this shows a filter. If I select a filter, it shows me the tasks, and I can set those tasks and see some sort of UI. If I select all tasks, I'll see every task in the engine. So let's start our process first of all. I'm going to click up here, let's start process. You see we have two processes, the invoice one and of course the order drink process. If I select that, and I can say start. Okay. So then in all tasks, I now have my first task, which is called enter order details. Okay, now I gave this no UI. You probably noticed that when I was building it. So what task list is showing us is the generic task form, which allows you to see all the variables and also add them ad hocly as you go along. We're at this point in the process, the very, very start. So, and we know that this task here needs two specific variables. One is the name of the person who's ordering, and the second one is the time of day. So if I click claim, I get ownership of this task, and then I can add some variables. So I'm going to add name, a string, and this is going to be Dale Cooper. Okay, and I'm also going to add another variable, and this is time of day, and this is going to be another string, and this is going to be the morning. Okay, and now let's click complete. Okay, great. And as you can see, this shiny new task has just showed up. If I, because I completed the task successfully, if I take a look at that, I can claim it, and I can click on load variables here, and what I should see is the variables I added in the first task as well as the results of the DMN table, which in this case is a variable called drink called damn fine coffee. Now if we're interested in this from an admin perspective, this of course is an end user perspective. If we go back to Cockpit, if I refresh this, if I click on history, I can see that what has happened is we've actually gone through this step by step. We ran from here, we had this task, we then ran this DMN table, and now the process is currently at this point. So what if I wanted to find out why Dale got that coffee? Well, I can select this task here. I can see this instance I can then have a whole bunch of little tabs here, including executed decision instances. So this tab would show me any DMN tables that this task subsequently called. And you can see that one was indeed called. I'm going to open this in a new tab. And you can see that this is the table, the instance that was called. The recipient was Dale Cooper, the time of day was the morning, and therefore Damn Fine Coffee was done. So if we, for instance, wanted as an admin to sort of tinker with this a bit, what I could do is I can go back to the runtime. I can then click on maybe, you know what, I'm just going to click on modify, and now I'm just going to move this token back here where I can re-enter those details. So I'm going to apply modification, and this will actually move the state back to, well, not back, but to a new position before the just before the table. So let's proceed. And now, meanwhile, back in task list, this task has now been removed because we've changed the state, and instead we should see that we now have this guy back here. So we're back to order details. Now, back is not the right term, because if I click load variables, you'll see I still have exactly the same data. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change morning to night, and I'm going to complete this and see what happens. Okay, so now I'm going to select this, claim it, load the variables, and see that now my drink has changed to beer because we've ran through that table with different parameters. Okay, now it's a very, very simple table, and I'm interested in making it more complex, and for that we're going to go back to our design and we're going to add something a little more interesting to it. So what we're going to do is actually add some changes to our DMN table and create a DRD model. Let's go back to our model itself first of all. So there's a BPMN model. We're going to head back here to our DMN table. So this DMN table has, as we said, two inputs, but if we wanted, let's say for instance, the end user to type in the name of the recipient but the hour of the day it currently is, we would need to do some sort of calculation to work out, does 6 a.m. mean morning, or does that mean night? We have to, depending on the kind of person you are, that might mean one or the other. So I'm going to add an additional table that's going to give us some data about the time of day based on the input from the user. Now to do that, I actually just need to change this this file, this DMN table. If you click on Show DRD, we see that this is our table. This is the Side-On beverage that we just looked at. And I'm going to create a second table in the same context. Okay, and this table is going to be decide on time of the day. Okay, and the result of this is going to be sent to this table to be used then. And so let's go in here to this table, and if I click on this little green button, you see that here we are with our shiny new table, and it has a single input. This one's going to be hour of the day. It's a integer, and it's going to send out a time of the day, a string. Okay, now another difference between this table and the previous one is the hit policy. This should be unique. Given a single hour, really there should only be one output. The hours go from 0 to 23, so there's only going to be one possible output for this. So let's add the first one. So the first one is going to be pretty simple. It's going to be a range. So if it's between 6 and let's say 11, I'm being very very nice with this, then it's going to be the morning. Okay, once again I'm going to select this value here to add allowed values, which are morning, afternoon, evening, and night. Okay, and so if it's between 6 and 11, then it's going to be morning. If it's between, let's say, 12 and 4, or 12 and 16, then it's going to be afternoon. Great. Now we're at evening time, so let's say between 17 and 21. then we're going to have the evening. Now night is complicated because night, as we know in this case, actually runs from 22, so that's 10 o'clock till midnight, but then also till 6 a.m. And because that's a slightly more complex thing to write in, I'm going to click on Enter Advanced Mode. I'm going to just free text it. So I'm going to say between 22 and let's see, 23. Okay, and then I'm going to say add a comma to say and as well from 0 to 7. So sorry, it's 5. That counts as night. Let me just change that. Okay. So now the thing is, if I then return back to my normal mode, I have this expression shows up. So to make it easier for readers, I'm going to just select, right click on this and add a description. And I'm going to say between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. so that people don't need to worry about the expression. They can just see that's what I'm intended. And this is going to be nighttime. Okay, so we've done a good portion of it. Now we're just going to add some execution parameters, which are the same as in the previous example. So if I click on advanced mode, I just need to give this, first of all, a decide on time of day. Oops, that's not right. Decide on time of day. Okay. I also need here hour. I'll do just the word hour, so that's the variable, and then time of day is the variable here as the output. Okay, so that's that gonna work. I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna go back to the DRD for a moment and just see that what we've now done is we've now got a dependency. This is what this thing does. So we're actually not going to change our BPMN model. It's still going to call this table. The difference is now that this table has a dependency, which means this must run first. So if we call this table, the engine will see, oh, this has a dependency right here. So I'll have to call this first. And then also the result of this is going to be fed into this table here. Okay, so I just now need to actually save this, override the previous one, and deploy this file to the engine. So if I go back here, we're going to head to our fun little spot, the deployment section, and I'm going to log in again as demo and click on deploy. Then I'm going to choose my file. I'm going to choose the DMN table, open it, new DMN, and click deploy. Okay, so that was deployed correctly. Again, we should be able to go into the decision guy right here and see that we now have a DRD called definitions. I didn't give it a proper name. We have 2 more tables. But more importantly, I can now, without changing my BPMN model, because these are independent artifacts, I should be able to start this process once more without needing to worry about changing anything about the BPMN itself, because the DMN should be able to be maintained and edited independently of anything that calls it. So if I go to start the process again, I'm going to go to enter details. I'm not going to give this a time of day. I'm just going to give this an hour and somebody. So once more, we're going to go with a name. We're going to go to string. We're going to go with Dale Cooper. And we're also going to add the hour. And the hour in this case is an integer. And right now, I think it's about 2 o'clock. So I'm going to just add 14. And I'm going to click complete. Okay. And now we can see that we got, if we click on claim, load variables, we now have our Club Manta, because it's, it's lunchtime. So if I go back to Cockpit and I check out my process, we can then see that the ordering process is still there. We have a new instance, so I'll select that. If I want to know what happened with this, I can click on history. And now we can see if we select this, it passed through here exactly once. I can select this and I can select executed decision instances, and there we can see that we actually have 2 different tables were run. And that of course is because we may have just called decide on beverage, but this relied on decide on time of the day as defined by this DRD. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good introduction so far. And I hope that the DRDs will be useful for you, and the DMN integration with BPMN is also quite useful.